The year is 2026 and the world is starving. Not slowly, not quietly, loudly, violently, and without apology. Global grain prices have not simply risen, they have detonated. Wheat futures are at historic highs. Maize reserves across Europe and North America are thinning faster than governments can explain. The supply chains that once fed billions are cracking under the weight of climate shocks, geopolitical wars, and decades of agricultural negligence dressed up as economic policy. From the breadbaskets of Ukraine to the silos of the American Midwest, the story is the same. Less grain, higher prices, more hunger, and the poorest regions on earth, the ones that were never truly part of that global food system to begin with, are being told to tighten belts that were already cutting into bone. The Sahel has had this story before. For generations, the people of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have watched their food security dangle like a carrot by international markets they never controlled. They have watched their harvests priced by commodity traders in Chicago and Paris. They have watched food aid arrive with conditions, with cameras, with politicians making speeches about generosity, while quietly securing the next export contract. They have watched, and they have suffered, and they have been patient. But patience in the Sahel has officially expired because something extraordinary is happening in a valley that most of the world cannot find on a map. A valley that has slept through centuries of colonial extraction, post-independence neglect, and structural adjustment programs that adjusted everything except the hunger. The Sourou Valley is waking up, and when it fully opens its eyes, the global food order will never look the same again. To understand what is happening here, you must first understand what the Sahel has been told about itself for decades. It has been told it is too dry, too poor, too conflict-ridden, too dependent, that its people lack the capacity, the technology, and the institutional framework to feed themselves at scale. These were lies dressed as economic analysis. The Sourou Valley alone, a fertile floodplain threading through the northwest of Burkina Faso, holds enough agricultural potential. The river that gives it its name flows with quiet, patient power through soil that agronomists have known for decades is among the most productive in the sub-region. It was never the land that failed the people. It was the systems built around the land that failed them. Colonial trade routes designed to extract, not to feed. Post-independence governments more focused on urban political survival than rural agricultural investment. International development frameworks that encouraged cash crop dependency and discouraged the kind of sovereign food infrastructure that would have made aid unnecessary. The Sahel was kept hungry, not by geography, by design. And now the military leaders of the Alliance of Sahel States, forged through fire, legitimized through the fury of populations who had simply had enough, are dismantling that design piece by piece, brick by brick, irrigation channel by irrigation channel. They are not asking for permission. They are not waiting for a World Bank feasibility study. They are not holding press conferences to announce intentions. They are building. While global grain markets burn, the Alliance of Sahel States is quietly constructing the most ambitious sovereign agricultural infrastructure project in the history of the West African Sahel. And the Sahel Valley is its beating heart. The shift being engineered here is not a policy tweak. It is not a development program with a 5-year sunset clause. It is a civilizational reset, a fundamental reimagining of how the Sahel relates to its own land, its own water, its own food, and its own future. The model being built has a name. It is called the Sovereign Agricultural Fortress, and it is exactly what it sounds like. A fortress does not beg for grain. A fortress does not check international commodity prices before it decides whether its children will eat. A fortress produces, stores, processes, and distributes, all within its own walls, on its own terms, by its own people. This is what is being built in the Sourou Valley, and it starts with breaking the chains that have held Sahelian grain hostage for far too long. The First chain to break is dependency on volatile international markets. For too long, the food security of Sahel nations has been tied to price fluctuations in markets thousands of kilometers away, controlled by players with no stake in Sahelian survival. That dependency ends with the construction of a sovereign food production system capable of supplying the domestic needs of the Alliance of Sahel states without reference to what is happening in Rotterdam or Buenos Aires. The second chain is the subsistence trap. Millions of smallholder farmers across the Sahel have been farming survival for generations, producing just enough to eat, never enough to invest, never enough to scale, never enough to escape the cycle of poverty that keeps them permanently vulnerable to the next drought, the next flood, the next shock. The sovereign agriculture fortress model replaces subsistence plots with integrated large-scale production units that give individual farmers the infrastructure of industrial agriculture while keeping the land in local hands. The third chain, and perhaps the most insidious, is the chain of post-harvest loss. Across sub-Saharan Africa, it is estimated that between 30 and 40% of all food produced never reaches a human mouth. It rots in inadequate storage. It spoils on broken roads. It disappears into the gap between production and distribution that no amount of farming genius can bridge without cold chain logistics, proper silos, and transport infrastructure worthy of the harvest it is meant to carry. This chain is being broken too, and the tool being used to break it is the most powerful force in human history. Not foreign aid, not international goodwill, not development loans carrying interest rates that ensure permanent indebtedness. Sovereign infrastructure investment, funded by the people, built by the people, operated for the people. The Sourou Valley is no longer sleeping, and the grain chains are already beginning to crack. There is a sound that the Sourou Valley has never heard before. The sound of concrete mixers running before dawn. The sound of steel beams being welded into silos tall enough to hold the ambitions of an entire generation. The sound of solar panels being angled toward a sun that, for the first time in this valley's modern history, is being put to work for the people who live beneath it, rather than the interests of those who live far above them. The infrastructure of sovereignty is not a metaphor. It is physical. It is measurable. It is rising from the earth right now, and it begins with water. The Sourou River has always been there, patient, consistent, quietly powerful. But for most of the valley's modern history, the river and the land around it existed in a relationship of missed opportunity. The water flowed, the soil waited, and the people watched, farming where they could, surviving on what little traditional irrigation methods could deliver to fields that should have been among the most productive in the entire sub-region. That relationship is being fundamentally redesigned. Massive automated irrigation networks are being carved into the landscape with a precision and ambition that would have seemed impossible just a decade ago. Channels that follow the natural contours of the floodplain are being engineered to carry Sourou River water deep into previously arid plains. Land that has never been farmed at scale. Land that has been waiting for exactly this moment. The scale of what is being built is difficult to comprehend from the ground. From the air, the irrigation grid spreading across the Sourou Valley looks like a new civilization being drawn onto the earth, because that is exactly what it is. But irrigation without reliable power is just an expensive ditch. This is where the solar revolution enters the story. Solar-powered pumping stations are being installed at strategic intervals across the irrigation network, drawing water from the Sourou and pushing it through the channels with consistent, reliable force that no diesel engine could sustain economically over the long term. These stations do not depend on fuel imports, they do not depend on international energy prices. They draw their power from the same sun that has beaten down on this land for millennia, and they will continue drawing that power long after the political fashions of the current global moment have changed beyond recognition. The energy sovereignty built into this irrigation system is not an accident. It is a deliberate architectural choice by military leaders who understand understand that every dependency is a vulnerability, and every vulnerability is a chain. By powering the water infrastructure with solar energy, the sovereign agricultural fortress of the Sourou Valley becomes genuinely self-sustaining in a way that no imported fuel-dependent system could ever be. Water moves through solar-powered channels, but water alone does not create food sovereignty. You also need the right seeds. The pivot to high-yield, climate-resilient wheat and maize varieties specifically bred for Sahelian conditions is one of the most consequential agricultural decisions being made in the valley right now. For too long, Sahelian farmers have been encouraged to grow what international markets wanted rather than what Sahelian soil and climate could optimally support. The result was crops that performed poorly, required expensive inputs, and left farmers permanently dependent on external suppliers for seeds, fertilizers, and technical knowledge. The new varieties being deployed across the Sourou expansion are different. They have been selected and in some cases specifically bred to thrive in the temperature ranges, rainfall patterns, and soil compositions of the West African Sahel. They require fewer external inputs. They are more resistant to the climate shocks that have historically devastated harvests and driven farmers into crisis. And they produce yields that, combined with the new irrigation infrastructure, are transforming the mathematics of food production in this valley completely. Where subsistence plots once produced barely enough to survive, irrigated fields planted with climate-resilient varieties are now producing surpluses. Real surpluses. The kind of surpluses that make storage infrastructure not just useful but urgently necessary. And the storage infrastructure being built here is extraordinary. High-capacity grain silos are rising across the Sourou Valley with a speed that reflects the urgency of what is at stake. These are not the rudimentary storage structures that have historically been available to Sahelian farmers. Structures that allowed insects, moisture, and temperature fluctuation to destroy a significant portion of every harvest before it could reach a market. These are industrial-grade facilities designed to preserve grain for extended periods to buffer the alliance of Sahel states against the kind of seasonal price shocks and supply disruptions that have historically made food security so fragile in this region. Alongside the silos, cold chain logistics infrastructure is being established to handle the perishable products, vegetables, dairy, meat that a truly comprehensive food system requires. The cold chain is arguably the most technically demanding piece of the sovereign agricultural infrastructure puzzle because it requires not just facilities but an entire network of refrigerated transport, reliable power, and trained operators working in coordination across long distances. The Alliance of Sahel States is building all of it, and connecting all of it are the new transport corridors that represent perhaps the most visible physical transformation of the Sourou region. Roads capable of handling heavy agricultural transport are being constructed to link the valley directly to the urban centers of the Alliance, Ouagadougou, Bamako, Niamey, with a directness and quality that has never existed before. These roads are not just agricultural infrastructure, they are statements of intent. They are the physical embodiment of a decision made at the highest levels of the Alliance of Sahel States that the people of this region will no longer be geographically isolated from the economic value of their own labor and their own land. When a farmer in the Sourou Valley harvests wheat, that wheat will move quickly, efficiently, and profitably to the people who need it, without spoiling, without being intercepted by middlemen who extract value while adding nothing, without disappearing into the structural inefficiencies that have historically stolen so much of the wealth generated by Sahelian agricultural labor. But perhaps the most powerful element of the infrastructure being built in the Sourou Valley is not the silos or the roads or the irrigation channels. It is what happens inside the processing plants. Localized industrial midpush processing facilities are being established across the valley with a strategic purpose that goes far beyond simple food production. These plants are designed to ensure that raw agricultural products, wheat, maize, groundnuts, sesame, are transformed into value-added goods before they ever leave the region. Wheat becomes flour, Maize becomes animal feed and industrial starch. Oil seeds become cooking oil and protein meal. What was once exported as a raw commodity, priced by international markets and processed into profitable products by foreign industries, is now being transformed within the Alliance of Sahel states, keeping the value added by processing inside the regional economy where it belongs. This single shift from raw commodity exporter to processed goods producer has the potential to multiply the economic impact of Sahelian agriculture by factors that make conventional development projections look embarrassingly conservative. The infrastructure of sovereignty is being built, and it is being built to last. Abundance is not a gift, it is an engineering problem, and the Alliance of Sahel states is solving it. The word abundance has never sat comfortably in the same sentence as the Sahel. The global narrative about this region has been constructed around scarcity of water, of food, of stability, of hope. That narrative has been repeated so many times in so many donor conferences and emergency appeals and devastating news reports that it has calcified into something that most people treat as geographical fact rather than what it actually is, a political choice that has been made and can be unmade. The engineering of abundance in the Sourou Valley is the unmaking of that choice. It begins with water, because in an arid region, everything begins with water, but it does not end there. The 2026 expansion of the automated irrigation network across the Sourou Valley represents the largest single investment in agricultural water infrastructure in the history of the Alliance of Sahel states. And unlike the irrigation schemes of previous development eras, which were often designed with foreign expertise, built with foreign labor, maintained with foreign technical support, and quietly controlled by foreign interests, this expansion is being engineered from within. Sahelian engineers are designing the channels, Sahelian construction workers are building them, Sahelian agricultural scientists are determining the cropping systems that will use the water most efficiently, and Sahelian farmers, equipped with training, inputs, and institutional support that previous generations could only have dreamed of, are the ones whose hands will ultimately turn the engineered potential of this system into actual food on actual tables. The automated elements of the irrigation network are particularly significant. Traditional irrigation systems in smallholder African agriculture have historically required enormous amounts of human labor to manage, labor that competes with the labor of farming itself, and that introduces inefficiencies that reduce yields and increase costs. The automated systems being installed in the Sourou expansion use sensor networks and programmed flow controls to manage water distribution with the precision and consistency that human management alone cannot achieve. This means that a farmer in the Sourou Valley in 2026 is not just a farmer. They are the operator of a sophisticated agricultural system that combines their intimate knowledge of local soil and seasonal conditions with the precision management capabilities of modern irrigation technology. The result is a hybrid form of agricultural knowledge that is more powerful than either traditional practice or imported technology could achieve alone, and the crops being grown in this system are matched to it with equal sophistication. The high-yield, climate-resilient varieties being planted across the expanded Sourou irrigation network are the product of years of agricultural research, some of it conducted by international institutions, some by African research centers, and increasingly by scientists working specifically within the context of Alliance of Sahel states' agricultural priorities. These varieties are not theoretical. They have been tested in Sahelian conditions. Their performance under the specific soil types, temperature ranges, and water availability of the Sourou Valley has been verified, and the numbers they produce are transforming the economic calculus of food sovereignty. Where traditional rain-fed farming in this region might produce 1 or 2 tons of grain per hectare in a good year and nothing in a bad one, the irrigated, improved variety system being deployed across the Sourou expansion is producing consistent yields of 4, 5, 6, and in some cases 7 tons per hectare. The difference is not marginal, it is civilizational. At these yield levels, the Sourou Valley does not just feed the people who farm it. It generates surpluses large enough to supply urban populations across the alliance. Surpluses large enough to build the grain reserves that protect against drought years and price shocks. Surpluses large enough to begin replacing the imported food products that currently drain foreign exchange from alliance economies at a rate that represents one of the most significant structural vulnerabilities in the regional economic system. The engineering of abundance is also the engineering of economic independence, because every ton of domestically produced wheat that replaces an imported ton is not just a food security victory. It is a foreign exchange conservation victory. It is a jobs creation victory, because that wheat is being grown, harvested, stored, transported and processed by people within the alliance of Sahel states, generating income at every step of a value chain that previously existed almost entirely outside the region. The women's cooperatives that are being integrated into the Sourou agricultural system represent one of the most powerful dimensions of this economic transformation, drawing on a model that has been pioneered in Burkina Faso's dairy sector, where solar-powered mini dairies run by women's cooperatives have already begun replacing imported European milk powder with domestically produced dairy products. The Sourou expansion is deliberately structuring its processing and distribution infrastructure to create economic opportunities for women at every level. This is not tokenism. It is strategic. Women in Sahelian agricultural communities have historically been the primary managers of food processing, storage, and distribution within the household economy. The sovereign agricultural fortress model is scaling those capabilities up, providing women's cooperatives with the facilities, training, and market access to operate at an industrial level rather than a subsistence one. The result is a food system that is not only more productive but more equitable, distributing the economic benefits of agricultural transformation more broadly across Sahelian society than any previous model has managed to do. The engineering of abundance is not just about growing more food, it is about building a society in which the wealth generated by food production stays in the hands of the people who produce it, rather than being extracted, as it has been for generations, by intermediaries, commodity markets, and economic structures designed for someone else's benefit. The Sourou Valley is being engineered for abundance, and that abundance is being engineered for the Sahel. History does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the form of a channel being dug, a silo being filled, a road being paved through land that has never seen asphalt, a women's cooperative receiving its first industrial processing equipment, a farmer harvesting 6 tons per hectare from a field that used to produce 1. History is arriving in the Sourou Valley right now, and when it is fully arrived, when the irrigation networks are complete, the silos are full, the processing plants are running at capacity, and the transport corridors are moving sovereign Sahelian food to sovereign Sahelian tables, the world will look back at this moment and understand that something irreversible happened here: the birth of food sovereignty in the Sahel. Food sovereignty is a term that has been used in development circles for decades. It has appeared in conference declarations and academic papers and activist manifestos, but in most of the places where it has been invoked, it has remained exactly that: a term, an aspiration, a political position rather than a physical reality. In the Sourou Valley, it is becoming a physical reality, and it is becoming one through a combination of factors that no previous generation of Sahelian leaders has managed to assemble simultaneously: political will, sovereign financing, indigenous technical capacity, and a population that has lived through enough manufactured dependency to understand, viscerally and completely, why sovereignty over their own food is not a luxury but a survival imperative. The political will driving this transformation cannot be separated from the historical moment that produced it. The military leaders of the Alliance of Sahel states came to power through popular uprisings against governments that populations judged to have failed them, failed to provide security, failed to deliver development, failed to translate the natural and human wealth of the Sahel into actual well-being for actual people. The legitimacy of these leaders rests on their ability to deliver difference. differently. The Sourou Valley project is delivery, tangible, measurable, photographable delivery. It is also a demonstration to populations that have been told for generations that their governments cannot be trusted to invest public resources effectively, that sovereign infrastructure investment works. That when the people of a nation pool their resources and direct them toward the strategic priorities chosen by those people rather than external creditors, the results are different from what the dependency model has always produced. The patriotic loan model, through which the Alliance of Sahel states has mobilized billions of CFA francs from its own citizens and diaspora, is funding significant portions of the Sourou expansion. This is not a coincidence, it is a deliberate demonstration of the principle that undergirds the entire sovereign agricultural fortress model, that the people of the Sahel have the resources, the capability, and the will to build their own future if they are given institutions worthy of their trust and leaders worthy of their investment. The citizens who subscribe to the patriotic loan are not passive beneficiaries of government largesse. They are investors in a project they own, and the Sourou Valley is part of what their investment is building. This matters beyond the economics. It matters because it changes the psychological relationship between Sahelian citizens and the states they inhabit, from subjects of a government that extracts and delivers inadequately to stakeholders in a project of collective sovereign construction. That psychological shift is as important as any silo or irrigation channel because it is the foundation on which genuinely sovereign institutions are built and sustained across generations. The Pan-African significance of what is happening in the Sourou Valley extends far beyond the borders of the Alliance of Sahel states. For decades, Africa's position in the global food system has been a source of profound contradiction. The continent that contains the majority of the world's uncultivated arable land, the continent with the youngest and fastest growing agricultural labor force on earth, the continent whose soil and climate could, if properly harnessed, feed not just its own population but significant portions of the world, has been a net food importer, a recipient of food aid, a market for subsidized agricultural surpluses from Europe and North America. This contradiction has not been the result of African incapacity. It has been the result of a global economic architecture deliberately structured to make African agricultural self-sufficiency difficult through subsidized competition from foreign producers, through structural adjustment programs that dismantle public agricultural support systems, through trade agreements that opened African markets to imported food while restricting African exports, and through development frameworks that consistently prioritized export crop production over domestic food security. The sovereign agricultural fortress being built in the Sourou Valley is a direct challenge to that architecture. It says clearly and physically and without apology, we will produce our own food, we will process it ourselves, we will store it ourselves, we will price it ourselves, and we will feed our own people before we worry about what the rest of the world thinks about how we have chosen to organize our agricultural economy. This message, embodied not in words but in concrete and steel and irrigation water and grain, is resonating across the African continent in ways that are only beginning to be understood, because the Sahel's food sovereignty is not just the Sahel's victory, it is proof of concept for an entire continent. If the Sourou Valley can be transformed from a sleeping giant into the breadbasket of the Alliance of Sahel states, in the face of security challenges, international sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and the daily operational difficulties of building complex infrastructure in one of the most challenging environments on earth, then the model can travel. It can travel to the Niger River Valley, to the Congo Basin, to the Ethiopian highlands, to every fertile region on the African continent where the gap between agricultural potential and agricultural reality has been maintained by systems of dependency that serve everyone except the people who live there. The Sourou Valley is not just feeding the Sahel, it is writing the manual for African food sovereignty, and that manual, written in irrigation water and solar energy and climate resilient seeds and the sweat of farmers who finally have the infrastructure their labor deserves, will outlast every government, every military leader, every international institution, and every commodity market that has ever told the Sahel it cannot feed itself. The grain chains are broken. The infrastructure of sovereignty is rising. The engineering of abundance is underway. And the birth of food sovereignty, real, physical, measurable, sovereign food independence is happening right now in a valley that the world forgot, being built by a people that the world underestimated. The Sahel was never weak. It was never incapable. It was never destined for hunger. It was simply waiting with the patience of people who have survived everything for this exact moment. The Sourou Valley is awake and it will never sleep again. This is the Sahel Bulletin. Subscribe, share, because this story belongs to all of us.